I needed a creative output outside the Who. I needed to be a solo artist.
So, Mr. Townsend, in the first place, what was it that made you step outside your work with the Who and pursue a solo career as well?
You know, I suppose what happened was really the death of Keith Moon came at a time when we were already struggling creatively. I did have a solo career coming up with Atlantic when Keith died, and I think the logical thing for me to have done would have been to have ended my tenure with the Who and pursued a solo career. But instead, what actually happened is that I felt that it might be something that would be good for me as an artist to work with a different drummer, because Keith's style was very much decorative. It was not a rhythmic style, and I'd been contained in to be the drummer in a sense on the guitar with the Who, and but that didn't really work out. You know, in 1982, by the time I got to the end of 1981, I was struggling to find the energy to pursue a solo career and be in the Who, so I left the Who. And to be honest, I wasn't particularly interested in a solo career. I went and worked in a publishing house, Faber and Faber, for 11 years. I was active for 8 years, and I ran other companies, and my solo contract still existed. So I made a couple of albums for Warner Brothers, and whenever the opportunity came to do solo shows for charity, I tended to do them, and that's what a lot of these shows on this collection are shows that I did for charity, or to plug a record, to plug an album that came out.
What did you get out of that though? What did you get out of that? The rush, was the rush different when you were on stage as Pete Townsend as opposed to Pete Townsend and the Who?
The fundamental thing about me is, the weird thing about me compared to most artists is that despite the fact that I look sometimes like I'm enjoying myself, particularly as a solo artist, I think I look like I'm enjoying myself. Not always with the Who, but I think I'm a good actor because I don't really feel very much at all. It's not that I don't feel good about performing. I just don't know who that guy is that's up there on the stage. He isn't me. I don't suggest that I'm occupied and channeling some demon, but and I'm not apologizing for smashing guitars, because that was something that I did when I was very, very present in my body and in my normal self. I think the performing side of my life has been one which has really shone a light on the fact that as a creative, I'm happiest in a studio. I don't like touring. I don't like traveling. I like to be at home in my studio being creative on my own. That's what I like to do. I would have made a very good Frank Auerbach or Lucian Freud, sitting in a mucky studio, or Francis Bacon sitting in a mucky studio, throwing paint around and making millions and millions of pounds. As it turned out, I ended up in the Who, and because I was the songwriter, of course, I got tremendous fulfillment out of that as a creative. But as a performer, I've always been uneasy. So this solo work for me was stuff that I only did because there seemed to be a cause behind it, sometimes a political cause, sometimes just a charitable cause, or plugging a solo album. And it's interesting for me to, for example, look at the Deep End show that I did with David Gilmour, where I'm obviously having a really, really good time, but looking back, I don't know that I even really felt that I was present. I'm very strange about performing, without question.
Wow, that's really interesting to hear. There's some amazing covers that I got a chance to listen to. I loved as a kid. I loved Harlem Shuffle, and your version of it is amazing. And then there's a version of "I Put a Spell on You" as well, which is just mesmerizing. It was incredible to listen to, Mr. Townsend. So, how did you decide on? Oh, and there's a great Elvis song too. "That's All Right, Mama." Uh,
Oh.
how did what songs did you gravitate towards when you did these covers?
I think when I'm in solo mode, I'm a bit more like, I'm not trying to compare myself to Bob Dylan, but much more in that fun of loose frame of mind where I want to play songs that I love, and those three songs happen to be three songs that I really, really love. The version of "I Got a Spell on You" is the Nina Simone version that I copied, and Harlem Shuffle is just a record from my mod days back in 63, 64, when all of that music was first starting to come to the UK. It felt appropriate to honor that period, and I think. On one of the shows, I think I did a version of a song by English Beat called "Save It for Later." I love that song, and it was so joyful to play it. Sometimes playing songs by other artists and other musicians allows you just really just to enjoy the music for what it is. You're not selling anything, you're not plugging anything, you're not trying to convince somebody that this is something that's really special. You're just enjoying being a singer and an artist, and it feels creative. It feels more creative in a sense than playing a song that you wrote, that you've recorded, that you're now playing constantly all the time as part of your career. As someone who did I've done all of my work, significant work, before I was 30 years old. So I'm pushing 80 now, 80 next birthday. And all I'm talking about is stuff that I did when I was a kid. Nowadays we talk about people that are in their late 20s as being children. I was a child, and but I was incredibly energetic, but I didn't really have a cohesive sense of direction unless it was contained in the Who machine, which felt to me like a really good job. It was a really good job, and we had great fans, and so it was good to rise to, but it was also very, very hard. The reason I started a solo career was that I had personal problems. I had problems with overwork. I had problems with drinking too much. I wasn't a drug guy, but I drank a lot of brandy, and it didn't help my functioning. And I tended to blame the industry rather than blame myself, the fact that I had issues that really needed counseling. And I'm one of the first examples of somebody that went through that and survived. I shouldn't be here. Both John Entwistle in The Who and Keith Moon died because of drug abuse and alcohol problems. I survived, and I'm lucky to be here. But a lot of the people around me felt that my problem was that I needed a creative output outside The Who. I needed to be a solo artist. The solo deal that I did with Atlantic, which I was very, very happy to have, by the way, was on top of a big deal that we'd already done for The Who with Warner Brothers. So I had two record deals. The only person that I know that did that is Phil Collins, who had two big deals with Genesis and solo. And I don't know how he managed it. But to be honest, I didn't manage it. That's what happened. It didn't work out. So my solo career was something that I was really happy I had. Today, wow, musicians would be so pleased to have a record deal, so pleased to be given money to go into a studio and make a record. And I know I was very, very lucky. But today I'm happy to enjoy making music, whether or not it's released, whether or not it's streamed, whether or not it goes viral, whether or not it's a hit. I just love making music, and I love doing it on my own.
That's actually one of the most interesting things about reading some of these old rock bios. I finished Brian Johnson's AC/DC biography earlier this year, and it's the time and also Sting's that musicians got to go in the studio, work things out instead, and not have that pressure of album sales. Mr. Townsend, the Who songs that you interpret on these live on these live albums, it's really interesting to hear some of them. I mean, I love the version of "Won't Get Fooled Again." How did the audiences and why did you kind of take those songs in maybe less familiar directions?
Because the Who direction had worked so well, and it would, interesting enough, Roger Daltrey, my colleague and old friend, is touring at the moment in the USA, and he's doing a version of "Won't Get Fooled Again" in which he's removed the synthesizer track, and his Katie Jacoby, the Who's violinist, is playing it on a violin, and it sounds fantastic. I think when we work solo, we have an opportunity to rework this material and to have fun with it. And the main issue that I had with my version of "Won't Get Fooled Again" is I had David Gilmour on guitar and Simon Phillips on drums and John Rabbit Bundrick on keyboards. These are three of the incredible greats in session music in the UK. And I couldn't have asked for better musicians. On the recording sessions for those albums, I also had Pino Palladino on bass. This is the most incredible set of musicians that any artist could hope for. So I just pushed the start button, and that's what happened, this explosive sound. And also on the version that you may be referring to, I had a big brass section. And that was fun for me because I grew up in the shadow of my father, who was a dance band musician, a brilliant saxophonist and saxophonist and clarinetist, and it reminded me of when I was a kid, and I used to sit in the back and watch this incredible band play this, Duke Ellington style music, and it made me dance. It made me happy, and that kind of revisiting of existing tracks that I must have played "Won't Get Fooled Again" 1,000 times. And of course, because it has a backing track, that synthesizer backing track, it's always exactly the same. This was a chance to just blow it up and see what happened. It was good fun.
Oh, it is incredible. And yes, I was talking about the horns. I mean, I heard it. It was like hearing that song for the first time. I'd never heard that version ever before. Mr. Townsend, you mentioned that, like not being drawn to the stage and the adulation and the fans, which came as a bit of a surprise to hear that. What was the draw for you in the first place for music? How did you fall in love with it? What was the album or the song that made you say, "This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life"?
I never said that ever. I was an art student. My father didn't really get it that I could ever be a musician. He was not very helpful in buying me my first instruments. He felt that I should be a writer or an artist. And so I went to art school. And it was while I was at art school, I was working in a little band with John Entwistle and Roger Daltrey. And we happened to get a record deal. And I happened to write the first hit that we had, Can't Explain. And I was advised by the lecturers at art college to leave college, pursue the band, and then when the band fizzled out, I would go back to art college. And that's how it began. I never imagined that the Who would last more than a year at the most. And I was very much looking forward to going back to art school. And I still am.
It's funny that you should say that. I saw an interview with you earlier this year. Maybe it was in March or February. You were promoting Tommy's return to Broadway. And I thought, oh man, I remember Tommy coming to Toronto and having an extended run here. I think it was in the 90s. I was really young. And then I thought, this watching the interview with you made me think about being a kid and the Who had their farewell concert in Toronto. It was on. I remember seeing it on the front page of the newspaper, and it wasn't the farewell, of course. But Mr. Townsend,
it was meant to be the farewell. It was meant to be. I think the reason we got back together again is very tragic. John Entwistle went broke, and the tax people were after him, and so we got together to save him. Really. that was meant to be the last concert. We had a tradition of trying, if we could, to start in Toronto and finish in Toronto. We only managed it twice, I think, but that was what we always wanted to do. We loved the Toronto audience, but the interesting thing for us as British artists is the fact that Toronto, I'm not talking about Montreal here, which has its French connection. Toronto has its British connection, and Edmonton had its mod movement and mods and rockers movement. Toronto has always had a special place for us. When you're talking about Tommy, the sad news is that Tommy is closing this month. The business has dropped out since we didn't get a Tony, and it may have dropped out anyway. Broadway is struggling, but yeah, I remember the version in Toronto with a fantastic kid, a fantastic Tommy. What was his name? I'm not going to be able to remember it, but he was already famous in Toronto with a teenage audience, and on the opening night, they screamed at him all the way through the show. And I remember saying to my friend who was with me at the time, "This isn't going to work. This is a play. And kids are screaming at him." I wish I could remember his name. He was just so fantastic. I should look it up really. But anyway, as one does these days on my iPhone. But we've always had a very special relationship with Toronto, without question. I still have that. And Des McAnuff, who's the director of Tommy, is my creative partner in that exercise, is of course a Torontonian.
What was if you can, if there's a moment, what was this? Is there a standout moment from that show back in 1982 at Maple Leaf Gardens?
There is probably, and it probably has something to do with a girl. So it's probably best that I skip over
it. But after the Who were you reinvigorated though? After the Who did come back later that decade, and then of course there was you had a solo record that came out in the early 90s, 1993. Did that reinvigorate you to be back on stage again?
There we have it. We come back to the peculiarities of me as a man and a performer. I think it makes it feel and it makes it sound as though what I do on stage, I'm enjoying this conversation more than I would going on stage. So for me, being on stage, touring, feels like work. It feels like well-paid, wonderful work. It's a wonderful job to have, and I feel very lucky to have had it. But to have imagined that at any point I could have looked to it for emotional and spiritual uplift is probably where I made some of my biggest mistakes, in a sense. I think for me, performing has always been a problem. It has been a problem for me. Is it a problem because I feel I'm acting? I don't know. But if I go on stage and I laugh and I make jokes, I feel like I'm reading from a script. It doesn't feel natural to me. I don't know why, and it's interesting because I grew up, with my father's band. I traveled with them, and from being like 2.5 years old, I was on the road with my dad's band in the bus, with the trumpet players and stuff. And I loved it. But I don't think there was any part of me that really wanted it. And I don't know whether I could see, for of course, that my dad was never there because he was always on the road. He was always traveling. So it may just have been some, child thing, something that would come up in therapy where I didn't really want to relive my father's life. I didn't really want to be on the road away from my family. So when I did that, It was always never with resentment, always with gratitude, but a sense that something was missing. And of course, it was my family, my home, my friends from home, and my ordinary life as a father and a friend and a husband. And that what I had instead was this band and a bunch of fans, which unfortunately for me did not make that connection. I've seen other artists, Dave Grohl is one, for example, who has made that connection. His fans and his band are his family. They're his people. They're a part of his family. Bruce Springsteen, I think, his fans and his people and his band are part of his family. They're part of his complete picture. For me, The Who and any performing that I did as a solo artist always stood outside that. Do you see what I'm saying?
It's incredible. I mean, yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I've never thought of it that way. I've always thought with artists, especially even as a kid, seeing the pictures of you were fascinating to me. Sometimes if I saw some of the blood, I thought maybe that seemed a little harsh, but it just seemed the idea. And I fell in love with, I mean, we used to, as kids, Mr. Townsend, we used to argue about the Police and the Who and and AC/DC and Led Zeppelin. I mean, we had these conversations, and of course it created a lifelong love of these artists that exists to this day. Your last album was 30 years ago. The Who released a record, I think it was in 2019. Is there new music on the horizon? Is there a new album somewhere in the offing?
We had an album more recently than that, an album called Who, which did very, very well. I don't think it was as early as 2019. I think it was 20, was it? I think. No, maybe you're right. Maybe it was 2019. It doesn't seem that long ago to me. It feels like yesterday. But when you get to my age, time passes very quickly. No, I don't think we'll make another album. And the reason is simple. I don't think Roger Daltrey wants to make another album. I would love to make another album. So if I want to make another album, it will have to be a solo album. On the other hand, I think both Roger and I look forward to the very difficult subject of being able to tour again with each other and to work in some way that feels new and different and exciting. Because when we've been doing this orchestral tour, it's been really, really cool. It hasn't left me much space to express myself as a creative musician on stage, but it's been a great experience. So we need something new, and we need to talk about that. So we're hoping we can find something so that we can perform again before one of us passes away, and it would be a wonderful thing to do. I don't think we'll ever say this is our final tour again. As you've reminded us, we finished in Toronto, so I don't think we can do it again.
You'd have to begin in Toronto and end in Toronto. Mr. Townsend, before I let you go, early in the conversation, you talked about your dad and said he wasn't much of a help to you in terms of being able to, foster the career. What did he think when you became famous?
I bought him his first house. I bought him his first decent car. I bought him his holiday home in the Balearic Islands. He was really pleased with me. We played together once on the TV. You can find it on YouTube. It's me and my dad performing on something called the Michael Parkinson Show, me being a bit jazzy with my dad. He was a handsome man. He was a lovely man. He was a fabulous guy, but he just didn't get rock and roll. He also said to me once, and this could be why, he said, Pete, you guys with your big amplifiers, and remember the Who invented the big amplifiers. We had big amplifiers from the get-go. We didn't start, well, we did start with little amplifiers, but once we became famous, we had these huge amplifiers. We were loud. He said, you guys can fill a ballroom with just three of you, making the music and a singer. For us, it's 20 people. We have to, we can't we can't do what you do. You are putting us out of business. He didn't say it in anger. He didn't say it with resentment, but he stated it as a fact, and it turned out to be a fact. So he never really got rock and roll, but he did help me to get to my first rock and roll movie, which was Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock with my buddy Jimpy. And we were 11 years old, and my dad organized the tickets. And then he organized the tickets for us to go and see Bill Haley live in London when we were 12. So he helped.
Thank you so much, Mr. Townshend. What an honor. What a pleasure. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you back on stage soon.
Good. Thanks a lot. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.